So today, what I wanted to do is kind of give you a rundown of obviously our most imminent product, Windows Server 2016. It's not far away now, just a few short days, and I thought today, with the short amount of time that we had, we would have a look at just a couple of the features that sort of sing the value of what's changed in Windows Server 2016. Just try and highlight the sort of opportunities that's likely to create for you, and then just give you a quick overview of the changes to the licensing model that has brought about as well. There's all change on server licensing. So give you a run through of that, and at the end of the webinar there'll be time to ask questions as well. I am going to I'll make an effort to kind of stop periodically and cover questions off, but it's likely that we'll do the majority of Q&A at the end of the session, just so I can kind of keep focused on the presentation bits and pieces. So I guess starting out, it's kind of important to note that very frequently the execution of Microsoft's vision, which is to empower people, to empower businesses and so forth, is quite bold and in your face, but it's extremely subtle with Windows Server. You don't see it as an end user, you just kind of get the benefit in far less tangible ways. But that's not to say that the effort that's put into Windows Server isn't equal to the effort that goes into the products that are a little more mainstream in terms of finding what our customers are asking for, what our business partners are after as well. So I'm not going to overdo market trends. It's a bit of a pet hate of mine when you have 15 slides telling you what used to be the case. So just one, which will tell you that actually small medium business is a huge part of the Microsoft opportunity. It's incredibly important to the Microsoft product range, and is increasing in its spend year on year significantly. These figures are a couple of years now, but the spend is touching up on $1 trillion year on year, which is incredible really when you think about it. So that growth is significant. A large chunk of that is virtualization, which obviously a huge part of what we aim to do with Windows Server, and so shows no sign of slowing down at all anytime soon. So when it comes to some of the new functionality within Windows Server 2016, you can broadly sum it up by saying it's safer, it's more efficient, and it's kind of cloud connected. Some of you may wish to kind of pause there and kind of that'll do. We'll dig into that a little bit deeper, but equally, there's a huge array of features that have been added into Windows Server 2016, and I think coming from Server 2012 R2, where largely we're focused on the HyperV and datacenter edition with virtualization, all that kind of stuff, it might have felt as though that was a key focus, and a lot of the other features were a little bit quieter. This time around, there's a significant number of big relevant features that will allow us to sort of change our offerings and drive some new developments in IT as well. So broadly speaking, safety is a huge factor, and we'll talk about how we can protect networks from external attack, but also from internal attack as well. We'll talk about the efficiencies of some of the technologies along the lines of containers, storage spaces, that sort of thing. I'll just touch briefly on the cloud because we can't ignore this fact that hybrid is a huge part of the conversation that we're having right now. So the way this works, I'll give you a quick run through of some of these features, just top level, so that you have an idea of some of the key things that have changed. There will be links on many of these slides that you can see towards the bottom. All of the slides will be shared with you. You can access those by completing a survey at the end of the session, which the team Phil will send out to you, but all of these slides will be made available. Each of the links will take you through to the appropriate page on whether it's Microsoft or TechNet or so forth, and give you the detailed specifications of those features, how they work, as well as some scenarios as to how you might find them. But I have lifted some of that information into our deck, and we'll talk about just a couple of those to give you a rough idea. I guess the reason safety is such a big factor for us is because of the cost of data breaches in large business increasing, but also the damage it does to small medium business as well. And it's on the up, right? People are not getting more secure, they are getting less secure on average. There are more breaches, which despite best efforts to secure networks do not seem to be going away. So this first feature, just in time and just enough administration, is all about, I suppose, giving customers peace of mind that when you've set up services for them, you set up servers for them, that actually they still have control or if deferred to you, you still have control of external forces coming in and perhaps working with their network. To give you an example of that, if you've got a business that you've kind of taken on, where you are now going to be managing their administration for their servers, you've got potentially a long list of admins that could exist on a network. You've got file admins, you've got domain controller admins, you've got print admins, you've got a whole list. And the reality is, when sort of taking on new business or when just assessing your network, it's very often the case that you find a number of previous admins can be set up that have just not ever been taken off the network, have never been taken away. So what JIT and JEA in this case do is they provide constraints around the administrative access that can be provided to a network. So if you've got an engineer that's coming along to repair a broken DNS cache, they can do that without necessarily having rights to the full Active Directory. They may not need to browse the system, or it will allow you to be sure that somebody coming along to do work on your system won't necessarily have all of the access that they might have in the past. So this idea that we can create sort of windows and lists of functionality that might be relevant to a particular job for an administrator, to allow them to do the work they need to do without allowing them to go too far into the system. So that just enough piece, and also the just in time, if someone tells you it's going to be 6 hours to repair a DNS cache or whatever, then you can set a window of 6 hours, and after that point their access to the network will expire. So very useful if you've got additional engineers, admins, etc. working in environments, but also this is not all from a standpoint of your customers don't trust you. A lot of the time this solution needs to be in place in order to achieve compliance, regulatory certification, that sort of stuff. So if you're working in organizations where compliance is of high concern, it'll be nice to be able to add some of this functionality that protects a business from the possibility of rogue administrators and so forth. So again, further details are available on all the features, but top line, that's basically a way of blocking out unwanted administrative control. The other one I wanted to top line for you is shielded virtual machines, which takes that principle and extends it into the cloud to some extent. In Server 2016, HyperV supports this concept of a shielded virtual machine. They're protected against unauthorized access using various technologies, including encryption of their virtual disks and so forth. And those protections extend to the HyperV administrators and so forth. So if you are the owner of the virtual machine, if you control it, you can effectively create your virtual machine, spec it out and send it into the cloud. But where in the past you would have, wherever a virtual machine is created, there is somewhere a physical server that holds it, and you would have a somebody who would have access to that disk, to that rack, to that server physically, who could pop a USB stick in and copy away an Active Directory domain file or whatever they could get access to. This is slightly different in so much as now, when you specify your virtual machine, it's protected, and when you push it into the cloud, it's protected as well. So they're encrypted at rest, they're encrypted on both sides of the conversation, and they're managed by this tool called the Host Guardian service, which is a new role in Windows Server 2016 that it manages manages and authorizes the release of the encryption keys used to shield the virtual machines. Those keys are never revealed to anyone or anything other than the VM they're protecting, so it's all autonomous, and they are obviously set up at the point that the original virtual machine owner creates that VM. So again, that same sort of situation where in the past, if you wanted to create a virtual machine, sometimes you'd go to a portal. Taking our own into consideration, you would go to the Azure portal. One of the very first things that you would do is to set out your username, set out your password to access the virtual machine, and inevitably you would you kind of be giving the keys to the vault over straight away, potentially, if there was even the slightest risk that site may not be safe. So again, in terms of compliance, in terms of meeting the needs for regulatory bodies and so forth, these features are incredibly strong, and they provide great protection from internal attack, that sort of stuff. So anybody who tried to copy off a database file that was protected in this way would see a BitLocker level encrypted file. They wouldn't have access to the virtual machine itself. They wouldn't even have thumbnail access to the virtual machine. They literally couldn't see it, couldn't access it, couldn't do anything at all. And again, if you're working with highly regulated organizations, then you want to learn more about that, there is more information available. So just kind of turn tack a little bit onto some of these efficiency features. Some of the developments within Server 2016 are about bringing uptime back to the kind of front as well. So there are some cool new features that automate storage, and these containers are pretty popular too. And effectively what they allow us to do is to build highly available storage solutions using traditional local storage. So effectively, if you have a combination of servers, they each have their own storage solutions in place, you can combine them virtually and allow them to share a pool of storage. And what's great about that is we can add and remove devices into that pool without affecting the uptime of the server. So if you've bought a new server with new storage solution, you want to include that in a network, you can virtually absorb that in. It won't impact on the original storage solution. So this high availability being a key priority in that respect. The flexibility that allows us as well, because we can utilize different combinations of storage too. If you want to use a rack, a drive in a server, or an external SAN, NAS, or whatever it might be, you can combine any of those storage types together to create that highly available storage solution all up. In addition to that, we've explored container functionality within Server 2016 as well. And I suppose we've seen this massively popular virtualization has been going on for years and years and years. It's nothing new. And effectively what containers allow us to do is to virtualize an operating environment for an application. And there's tremendous flexibility that comes from that, because we can then start to stack applications next to each other on the same virtual machine or on the same server, and they can live quite happily there. If there are any issues that they encounter, we just close one application down within its container and then fire it back up again. So in terms of working with businesses that do like to deliver, again, highly available apps, or just a large number of apps, or if you want to be able to do more application delivery on a lesser footprint of physical infrastructure, then containers are an interesting solution to do that. And many people will be familiar with companies like Docker, who've been doing this for a significant amount of time as well. Google are a massive user of containers and container technology. We're able to do very, very large deployments using the container technology within Windows 2016. So hugely interesting feature. Again, it's quite involved. If you want more information about that, again, it's available on the links, but equally you're very welcome to ping me an email if there's any of these technical features that you think are relevant to projects that you're working on or you'd like to know more. So a quick nod to the cloud next of all. It's fair to say that we deliver cloud technology in two ways. One is through Azure itself, the other is through the Azure Stack. And the Azure Stack will be an on-premise execution of Azure functionality. It has been pushed back into next year now, so it's a little bit delayed. But it will be something that you could, in theory, put straight onto a server and sell into a business as a solution. Would potentially run yourselves as a solution as well. We are increasingly aware of the interest in hybrid technology. The public, but equally business, are very, very interested in using hybrid solutions at the moment, which is kind of great for us because there are strong market leaders out there in the cloud space who are very, very cloud heavy, but actually Microsoft's 25 plus year heritage in server technology and all the associated pieces gives us a really strong position when it comes to hybrid solutions. So the idea that potentially when you've got solutions such as storage spaces, or if you have a need for additional power, a need for additional processing power, compute, storage, networking, you can lean on the cloud. So Server 2016 will be the first cloud-ready OS. It will enable you to extend those storage pools into the cloud using storage VMs with Azure. It will allow you to extend the capability of websites, processing situations, data crunching, that kind of stuff. Again, all through the use of the cloud, which is incredible. So technology-wise, that's just a kind of a top line on some of the features that are involved. There's a whole page of features, and I've got some slides in here that will kind of give you a list of the features if you want to explore that in a bit more detail. But I suppose the key thing here is the opportunity that this creates, and the opportunity is pretty enormous for our partners indeed. And when we start talking about owning the server transaction, that's the kind of the strategic foothold, isn't it? It's where the conversation begins. And it enables us to sell hardware, it enables us to sell server licensing with Westcoast, including both the operating system and very importantly all of the client access licenses that go along with that. And that again obviously allows us to then focus on the follow-on opportunities that would come after that, such as Exchange, SQL Server, SharePoint, Office. Again, some new versions of some of those tools coming too. And once you're into that kind of level of ownership of the solution, it is then all about how you can sell potentially things like storage, networking solutions, switches, routers, all that sort of stuff, and increasing revenue even further through things like value-added services and so forth. And this is all just talking about the things, right? In most of these cases, we're talking about stuff. But actually, when you start to wrap the value add that is the service delivery, the offerings, the management, the hosted IT solutions around that as well, the opportunity is pretty substantial. Okay. The variations that you'll see when it comes to Windows Server, we be transacting with obviously a pre-installed OEM solution, volume licensing solution. There are some other terms that get thrown around that people may not entirely be familiar with. You've got things like COEM for builders and so forth, which is always sold separately. You've got things like DOEM, which you might find on pre-built stuff from companies like Dell, HP, and so forth. You have reseller option kits, which you tend to find. So there's lots of terminology out there, but ultimately the key thing to note is that you've got the option whether you want to pre-install on a piece of kit and sell the tin, or whether you want to sell Windows Server licensing separately. And again, you have details here should you wish to explore that further. So key things, I suppose, to talk about. Many of the technology issues that are faced they're not all security focused. We talked a bit about security, and there are some real challenges there that the new version of Server 2016 will kind of empower companies to tackle. But equally, storage is a massive challenge. We're creating so much data that in fact, the figures suggest that 98% of all data was created in the last 2 years. So it's this exponential curve, which is driving massive consumption of data. So the ability to stretch out into the cloud, the ability to leverage these additional technologies is going to massively empower businesses to start using that data. And when it comes to the actual use of all that data that we store, again, it's a drop in the ocean compared to the overall figure. It's something like 2 to 3% of all that stored data is actually used and configured. So there's a huge opportunity for businesses that want to look at not only data storage solutions and the technology that empowers that, but equally that data analysis piece, things like right at the ground level with technology like Excel, straight up through into things like Power BI and analytics, stream analytics on Azure. So again, if that's something that interests you, ping me an email. I'd be very happy to sort of send you some resource on that should you wish to know more. The whole on-prem versus cloud, the point that's listed here, I think it's probably less of a factor these days whether you're comparing the speed and the performance of a physical server versus a cloud-based server. The performance gap is now so small that shouldn't be a key factor. Having said that, you're absolutely going to find customers who want that, that marginal gain of keeping stuff on premise, but they have the absolute freedom to choose the solution that's right for them, and they have the ability to move to the cloud at the pace that suits them as well, which is great. Okay. I'm not going to go into detail on all these because we'll touch on licensing pieces as we come to the later slides. So in terms of the products that are available in the range, you'll have obviously standard and data center will be the two key editions that will be licensed, certainly available through Westcoast. There are sort of subtle variations on these when you come to licensing codes and SKUs and things like that, which are broadly determined by the edition that you would like to apply to the server, the number of cores that you are licensing, and the sort of state as to whether you are licensing at the point of sale or whether you are licensing post-sale effectively. So you'll see all different sort of codes and variations, but those are the key things that will sort of factor into that. When it comes to the differences between data center and standard, that was always kind of relatively static in the past. It has now started to branch in and include some of these kind of new features, things like shielded VMs and so forth, featuring in the data center edition. But equally, there's a breakdown list here of the different features that have been made available in Server 2016 that were not in previous editions. So when looking for a reason to upgrade, whether it's things like containers or VMs or protection for that, whether it's the administrative stuff, the built-in, baked-in Windows Defender solutions and things like that. There's some pretty good stories to be told around why it's time to maybe consider, even if you're on Server 2012 R2, moving to 2016. The big change in licensing is a move away I suppose, from the sort of conventional processor-only based licensing that we've seen in the past. And customers are increasingly demanding hybrid IT environments. They want stuff on-prem and in the cloud, and they want the mobility of the data between the two. They want the freedom to be able to do that, and the new licensing model does reflect the need to enable the portability of apps and data by creating this common currency, if you like, for computing resources, whether they're located on-premise or in the cloud. And will allow us to more accurately reflect the evolution of the hardware technology. So core-based licensing just provides us a more consistent licensing metric, regardless of where that solution is deployed, on-premise or in cloud. So the change is then, if you have a processor, the short version is that the physical cores must always be licensed. Kind of the easy rules to remember is that you must license all of the physical cores on the server. You must ensure every processor is licensed to cover a minimum of 8 cores, and you must ensure every server is licensed to cover a minimum of 16 cores. So the short version of interpreting that is that the answer is always going to be at least 16 in terms of cores required, but the mathematics then starts to take over. It becomes a little easier after that. Now, there's a few scenarios that will help to, I hope, get this across. So if you have a customer that wants to license a single physical server, they have two processors in that server. They're 4-core processors. Because those processors do not meet the minimum license requirements on their own, so a processor must have 8 cores minimum licensed. So in that case, it doesn't matter that they're quad-core; they would still be licensed for 8 cores. This is physical cores. We're not talking about logical cores. If anyone starts to ask around hyperthreading and so forth, this is purely physical cores that we're talking about. In the second example, we have a server with a single 8-core processor, and because the server is only using the one processor, it must be licensed as a server for 16 cores minimum. So in that scenario, again, you might think 8, but actually it's 16. So I guess the short version is it's always going to be 16. Because we always assume that's the kind of the entry level. After that, as I say, the maths does take over. Final example, a physical server with 2 processors and 12 cores each. Well, in that case, yes, absolutely, it meets the minimum licensing requirements. So we would just license based on the amount of cores that are there and the amount of processors that are there. So in that scenario, you'd need 24 cores licensed, so 2 12s, in order to fully license that server. There are some benefits to fully licensing a server. I suppose actually one last kind of like an edge case scenario is asked. This was a question that was asked the other day. It is possible that you will find servers where the OEM has disabled the cores, and the customer will not have to pay for licenses for disabled cores until they're enabled by the OEM. So if it's been done by someone else, then that's a different scenario. But if the core has been disabled by the OEM, it doesn't need to be licensed. So the advantage of licensing all the cores on a physical server is that you're granted 2 VMs. So a fully licensed server will grant 2 VMs, and equally, if you are in a kind of a situation where you want just a couple more VMs, so there is a bit of a kind of a sweet spot between standard and data center edition, where if you wanted additional VMs, it may be more cost effective to simply relicense all of the cores to unlock the second set of VMs, so you get 2 more VMs if you relicense again. But equally, if you relicense for just 1, again, you would relicense all your cores, you would get 2, so it's only available in 2 packs. There is a chart in this deck that will show you some of the breakdown on how that works. I appreciate that's a lot of numbers, so please just use this for reference. The thing to take from this, I suppose, is that cost-wise, when looking at that sort of that minimum, the 16, the move from process to cores, the change in costs around that level is relatively minimal. It's virtually the same cost for those comparable services. I suppose where we will start to see more queries and we'll start to see some more challenges in the future, we'll see effectively incredibly powerful processors that will have many more cores, and you may see increases on cost at that point. But that's a challenge that we'll see in the future, more so than at the moment. Okay. So a question that's come in on the chat around the licensing is, does Hyper-V Container require a license? And you'll see that I'm just going to jump back a little bit because there are a couple of notes here that might be useful going forward. There are some slightly vague terminologies, but with your licensing effectively, depending on whether you're on standard or on data center, Hyper-V Containers are included in that licensing. So they do require licensing, but they are included in the different the versions of the licensing that's available. So if you're on standard, you've got 2 Hyper-V Containers included, and if you're on a data center, then you have unlimited Hyper-V containers as well. I think it's fair to say that we're all going to be finding our feet a little while with the licensing scenarios. The best advice I can give you, generally speaking, is early doors while we're kind of getting new inquiries in and trying to figure out the right message. Just lean on your resources, whether within Westcoast or within Microsoft, just to get the support you need, get questions answered. I suppose the key thing to note in terms of opportunity is there's a pretty significant sales revenue attach opportunity when selling Windows Server 2016, which is obviously to be confident to sell the cores, the CALs, as well as the server licenses. Again, these are sold in packs at point of purchase and can be sold. They're not a part of the license; they are sold separately. So again, do communicate that to Westcoast when sort of speccing stuff out, and figure out if there are any CAL requirements. There are different types of CALs available. You have obviously user CALs, device CALs, you have RDS CALs, and all that sort of stuff going on. But equally, if you're not too familiar, in essence, anytime they buy a Windows server, they'll receive that server license. That allows them to install it on one computer on its own. It won't allow somebody to utilize that server until they've licensed the CALs on the devices. In terms of the variations, if you're dealing with businesses or customers that are quite mobile, have lots of devices, then user CALs are probably the way to go, allowing you to access multiple devices with one user license. Equally, if you're in the reverse of that and you have many users using single solutions, such as help desking environment, hot desking environments, that sort of stuff. You've got people in call center, that sort of stuff. Then those are the scenarios where device CALs are still going to be strong. And then equally, anyone looking at remote desktop access would now be looking at a specific remote desktop service CAL to be able to access that server as well. So I've added a few facts on here. I'm just going to I'll come on to a couple of these in a minute. I just want to address a couple of the queries that have come up into chat. So there was a question that was asked around software assurance, and does it give the same benefits around core CALs and mobility, etc., etc. Software assurance is largely unchanged. It does have one particular benefit for customers who are moving up to Server 2016, which is that they, if they are affected by the price change from moving from processors to cores, then Microsoft will cover any costs that are incurred up until the point of their first renewal. So any negative kind of cost impact that they might incur for the change up, Microsoft will cover that off. There are some other points, core CALs, etc. To the best of my knowledge, there have been no changes to any of those elements. I will have a look and make sure that's the case and send through any additional SA information that people need. But to the best of my knowledge, there's no change on those features. We're talking about another question here with regards to VMware environments which have data center licensing. I probably need a little more information than that, I'm afraid, Bob, but I'll come back to that one if I may. And then there's another question here which has, you have to allocate a Windows Server license to the physical server, which is the answer, I believe, to the question above. So apologies, losing track a little bit with the chat. So I'm just going to park that, get through the rest of this, and then we'll do a sort of a deeper Q&A and try and cover off anything, or at least kind of capture a list of questions that are still outstanding. So some of the key facts then, it kind of lists some of those elements here. Customers obviously have to buy their CALs. They can buy used device CALs. They can buy whatever they need effectively. Anyone who's running servers, so again, a couple of myths, I suppose, to bust. Anyone who's running servers that have anonymous access through the internet, absolutely, they don't need to, in any way, shape, or form, license CALs for anonymous, unauthenticated access. And there are version-specific CALs as well. So this last point that's kind of touched on here, which says software assurance may be purchased for CALs, which allows you obviously to update any that you have to the latest version through volume licensing, should you wish to do so. I just want to kind of flick through a couple of slides that I've sort of attached to the end of the deck, as well as a couple of points in here that will give you some idea of some of the additional resource that will be sent over to you. So I guess first of all, there's a few kind of Q&A around some of the benefits of choosing on-premise versus cloud and so forth. So I've added in some of those kind of FAQs and so forth that may help to tackle some of those kind of situational queries that are coming up. And the same would go for the OEM server license bits and pieces as well. So I'm not going to linger on these, but they will be made available to you on completion of the survey. So there's a whole bunch of bits and pieces there that may help to answer some of those top level FAQs. I've also added in a whole bunch of scenarios that are specific to small medium business. So these are some of the areas that we expect to see good opportunity for Server 2016. And if you have an interest in any of those particular scenarios, within the slides that are sent to you, there's a little bit more information around what those are, how they work, and so forth. And again, if you decide that there's any of these that you'd like to explore more fully, then you can obviously get in touch with Westcoast or get in touch with myself. We can help to support you to go through that.